This is 1000 ants in captivity, and in this clip I'm holding a venomous Mediterranean centipede. So the question is, could a single venomous centipede survive against an army of 1000 ants, or would the ants slowly bring it down with nothing but numbers? Well, in this video I'm gonna test that alongside a tons of different scenarios to see just how capable ants really are. The problem is the 1000 Camponotus ants we have don't really like to be filmed under bright light. So we're just gonna have to order a different species of ants. And while this is not going to be cheap, but because I saved on delivery, it actually took a full week for the ants to arrive to my doorstep. And guys, I think the ants are inside of this box. Let's see. Oh yeah, look at that. That's a lot of ants. And if you look close, these are harvester ants, which amazingly are equipped with one of the most painful ant stings in North America and humongous mandibles, meaning the ants will have a big chance of fighting off potential predators. But will that be enough to beat the centipede? Well, we're just gonna have to find out. Now, before we can do anything with the 1000 ants we just bought, the ants are going to need a nest, since there's a bunch of things planned for them, going from easy to medium to extremely hard. So let's go ahead and start building the ant nest. And for that, let's just use an aquarium I have laying around and that we're going to slightly modify. And by modify, I mean drill a hole in the aquarium. Oh yeah, look at that, it turned out perfect. And we're going to use the hole we just drilled to connect a tube to the nest that later on will be used to let the ants leave the nest for all of the different tasks we have planned. But with the aquarium ready, let's quickly add the sand and press it in so that the ants can freely build up the nest. So now it's finally time to release the 1000 harvester ants into the aquarium. And although everything seemed normal at the moment, we were oblivious to the fact that we completely forgot to prep the walls of the nest. And within moments we had a disastrous amount of ants escaping, so we had to fix this very carefully and very fast, since having a bunch of very venomous ants roaming the room was a terrible thing. So all we could do is paint the wall with baby powder and pray none of the ants escape too far. And luckily for us, the crisis was successfully averted and none of the ants escaped. So next up, all we had to do is wait for the ants to start building their nest, which they began to do immediately. So now that we have the ants actually digging up the nest, we're gonna have to give them some water so that they don't dehydrate. Because for the next couple of days, all the ants will be doing is hard labor, since if you look close enough, the ants move tiny bits of the sand one piece at a time, a process that is definitely tiring and time consuming. But ants are fascinating creatures. Within just a day or two, they had completely transformed the aquarium into an intricate network of tunnels, complete with massive underground chambers, all by working together as a perfectly coordinated team. And they moved so much sand that they ended up burying the water tube we had given them. But that means the ants are finally ready for their first challenge, taking on the Venus flytrap, an apex predator of the plant world. It may look harmless at first glance, but it has evolved into one of nature's most efficient killers. Hidden inside are tiny trigger hairs, and the moment anything touches them, the trap rapidly closes and starts digesting the insect, eventually leaving behind nothing but an empty shell to be carried away by the wind. So why on earth are we putting the ants through this? Well, the goal is simple: train them to recognize and avoid danger, since fighting the centipede, well, that's not gonna be easy, and they're gonna need all the training they can get. So we began by placing some seeds into several of the Venus flytraps, since in nature seeds are the main source of food for harvester ants, and their mission is going to be carefully retrieving the seed and carrying it safely back to the nest. So can they do this? Well, let's find out. Here you can see the very first explorer ant setting off to investigate the brand new world we had just built for the colony, and within moments he had already wandered over to the Venus flytraps to check them out. But somehow he completely avoided the dangerous plant and just kept exploring like nothing was there, while more and more ants were starting to reach the challenge through the entrance. And just like that, we had our first two explorers, Beep and Bob, start the challenge. Suddenly Beep noticed a seed inside the flytrap, but he had no idea he was already making a fatal mistake. Unfortunately for Beep, he'll become nutrients for the plant, while the rest of the colony hopefully learns from his mistake. Shortly after that, we had another ant interested in the Venus flytrap, but the thing is, this flytrap was empty, and what the ant was actually interested in is the nectar that the Venus flytrap produces to attract insects. However, it seems the ants are learning a thing or two and he left the trap safely, something I hoped would happen with the rest of the ants. And as time was flowing, the ants were starting to get comfortable around around the Venus flytraps, which only meant it was a matter of time before these ants succeed. But then we spotted one of the bravest ants yet, casually walking all over the flytraps. Either he was fearless or he had absolutely no idea how dangerous the plant actually was. And finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, the ant was actually trying to pick up the seed. Okay, maybe we had made this challenge a little too difficult. Every time an ant tried to grab the seed, it would brush against the trigger hairs, causing the trap to snap shut and turn the unfortunate ant into nutrients. And trust me, we were ready to give up and move on to the next challenge. But something about this flytrap was different. Sure enough, only a few moments after setting up the camera, another ant climbed inside to inspect the seed. Somehow, despite walking all over the trap, it managed to avoid triggering it. And after struggling to get a good grip, the ant finally picked up the seed and walked right out of the flytrap without a single scratch. It immediately raced through the tube all the way back to the nest, completing the very first challenge for the entire colony and earning everyone a well-deserved reward. Which means we can now move on to the next challenge, the tightrope of Zeus. Yep, that's right, the second challenge is this thing. The ants will have to walk across this extremely narrow tightrope over a lake of acidic water. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. That would probably be illegal. It's just normal water. However, if the ants do manage to fall, they will end up swimming in this lake, which could result in them drowning. But ants are known to be good swimmers that can even build floating rafts just to survive a flood. So this challenge was going to be very interesting. And well, to complete it, all the ants have to do is just walk over the thread like it's just another Monday, grab a seed of their choice, and walk all the way back to the ants' nest. So can they complete this challenge? Well, let's find out. But before we get to that, if you're watching this video in the first couple of months of its release, you still have a chance to subscribe before we hit 1 million subscribers. You see, ever since we were kids, my cousin and I have always dreamed of doing this together. So if you want to help us in making our childhood dream come true, please consider subscribing. It would really mean a lot to us. Now back to our second challenge. We already had our first ant roaming around the starting point, and its very first objective was simple: find the thread, which I'm assuming shouldn't take that long since there's nothing else on the platform. But nonetheless, ants were starting to enter the second training camp, and I was interested to see if the ants can actually walk on the thread. But that's still something we're gonna have to discover, because for some reason the ants were just completely ignoring the thread. Not only that, but one of them actually managed to fall into the water in the first couple of minutes of this challenge. And what's interesting is that the ant isn't actually drowning. If you look close enough, you can actually see that the ant is trying to swim. But considering these are my pets, I decided to help out the ant by pulling it out of the water. And then my cousin was trying to show the ant where to go, but the ant had different plans and it just jumped back into the water. But not to worry, Baloney was the chosen one. He immediately figured out where to go, and just like that, the chosen one failed. Honestly, we had no idea why the ants were struggling that much to find the thread, until we stumbled across something very interesting. As it turns out, ants don't actually have perfect vision. In fact, they see the world very blurry, relying mostly on movement and changes in light to navigate. So with that in mind, we helped the colony learn exactly where the thread was. And just like that, the ant understood where to go. Slowly but surely, it was making progress, carefully walking all over the water lake. And honestly, this was amazing to watch in real life. I mean, to see the ant finally reached the other side was great. So now the easy part was officially over, and next up came the real challenge. The ant had to grab a seed and take it back home, which on paper sounds easy, but who knows what's going on inside of that tiny brain. However, the longer we watched, the more it seemed like the ant was carefully picking the perfect seed. So we waited, just carefully watching, and yeah, it left. But moments later, the ant was back, and this time it was most definitely choosing the right seed. But before taking it back to the colony, it stopped to groom itself, and it might even seem like a strange time to do this. But remember when I mentioned that ants don't have perfect vision? Well, that's because their antennae are their most important tool, and they use them for almost everything they do. So keeping them clean is essential, which meant this ant was doing everything exactly right. However, it decided to leave without grabbing anything, but instead it was soaking the thread with a chemical trail. And not only that, but it was also sharing the information it gathered with the rest. So at that point, I was certain that soon enough we'll see one of the ants complete this challenge. And the more ants climbed onto the platform, the more we had to keep a close eye on them so that we wouldn't miss the big moment. And then it finally happened. One of the ants picked up a piece of food and began carrying it back home. And although it got a bit lost in the way, it still managed to find the right path back to the thread. And since this was a special little ant, we named him Michael. Michael. And Michael's task was not easy. It seemed like he was struggling to keep his balance because the piece of food he was carrying wasn't tiny. And despite getting so close to the finish line, Michael still had to fight his way through, forcing every bit of strength